Georgia is a transcontinental country at the intersection of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. It is part of the Caucasus region, bounded by the Black Sea to the west, by Russia to the north and east, by Turkey to the southwest, by Armenia to the south, and by Azerbaijan to the southeast. The country covers an area of 69,700 square kilometers, and has a population of 3.7 million people. Tbilisi is its capital as well as its largest city, home to roughly a third of the Georgian population. During the Classical era, several independent kingdoms became established in what is now Georgia, such as Chalkis and Iberia. In the early 4th century, ethnic Georgians officially adopted Christianity, which contributed to the spiritual and political unification of the early Georgian states. In the Middle Ages, the unified Kingdom of Georgia emerged and reached its golden age during the reign of King David IV and Queen Tamar in the 12th and early 13th centuries. Thereafter, the kingdom declined and eventually disintegrated under the hegemony of various regional powers, including the Mongols, the Turks, and various dynasties of Persia. In 1783, one of the Georgian kingdoms entered into an alliance with the Russian Empire, which proceeded to annex the territory of modern Georgia in a piecemeal fashion throughout the 19th century. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, Georgia emerged as an independent republic under German protection. Following World War I, Georgia was invaded and annexed by the Soviet Union in 1922, becoming one of its constituent republics. By the 1980s, an independence movement emerged and grew quickly, leading to Georgia's secession from the Soviet Union in April 1991. For most of the subsequent decade, post-Soviet Georgia suffered from economic crisis, political instability, ethnic conflict, and secessionist wars in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Following the Bloodless Rose Revolution in 2003, Georgia strongly pursued a pro-Western foreign policy. It introduced a series of democratic and economic reforms aimed at integration into the European Union and NATO. The country's Western orientation soon led to worsening relations with Russia, which culminated in the Russo-Georgian War of 2008. Russia has since been occupying a portion of Georgia. Georgia is a representative democracy governed as a unitary parliamentary republic. It is a developing country with a very high human development. Economic reforms since independence have led to higher levels of economic freedom, as well as reductions in corruption indicators, poverty, and unemployment. It was one of the first countries in the world to legalize cannabis, becoming the only former socialist state to do so. The country is a member of international organizations, such as the Council of Europe, the OSCE, Eurocontrol, the EDRB, the BSCE, the GUAM, the ADB, the WTO, and the Energy Community. Etymology. The first mention of the name spelled as Georgia is in Italian on the Mappa Mundi of Pietro Vescant dated AD 1320. At the early stage of its appearance in the Latin world, it was not always written in the same transliteration, and the first consonant was being spelt with J as Georgia. Georgia probably stems from the Persian designation of the Georgians Gurn, in the 11th and 12th centuries adapted via Syriac Gurtse with Makron and /Gurtzin and Arabic Jurjan/Jerzan. Lore-based theories were given by the traveller Jacques de Vitry, who explained the name's origin by the popularity of Saint George amongst Georgians, while traveller Jean Chardin thought that Georgia came from Greek gamma epsilon omega rho gamma. Alexander Macabridge wrote that these century-old explanations for the word Georgia/Georgians are rejected by the scholarly community, who point to the Persian word gur/gurn as the root of the word. Starting with the Persian word gur/gurn, the word was later adopted in numerous other languages, including Slavic and West European languages. This term itself might have been established through the ancient Iranian appellation of the Near Caspian region, which was referred to as Gorgan. The native name is Sakartvelo, derived from the core central Georgian region of Kartli, recorded from the 9th century, and in extended usage referring to the entire medieval kingdom of Georgia by the 13th century. The self-designation used by ethnic Georgians is Kartvelebi. The medieval Georgian chronicles present an eponymous ancestor of the Kartvelians, Kartlos, a great-grandson of Japheth. However, scholars agree that the word is derived from the Karts, the latter being one of the Proto-Georgian tribes that emerged as a dominant group in ancient times. The name Sakartvelo consists of two parts. Its root, Kartveli, specifies an inhabitant of the core Central Eastern Georgian region of Kartli, or Iberia as it is known in sources of the Eastern Roman Empire. Ancient Greeks and Romans referred to early Western Georgians as Colchians and Eastern Georgians as Iberians. The Georgian circumfix saxo is a standard geographic construction designating the area where X dwell, where X is an ethnonym. Today the official name of the country is Georgia, as specified in the Georgian constitution, which reads Georgia is the name of the state of Georgia. Before the 1995 constitution came into force, the country's official name was the Republic of Georgia. It is sometimes still referred to as the Republic of Georgia by people and the media. History. Prehistory. The territory of modern-day Georgia was inhabited by Homo erectus since the Paleolithic era. The Proto-Georgian tribes first appear in written history in the 12th century BC. The earliest evidence of wine to date has been found in Georgia, where 8,000-year-old wine jars were uncovered. Archaeological finds and references in ancient sources also reveal elements of early political and state formations characterized by advanced metallurgy and goldsmith techniques that date back to the 7th century BC and beyond. In fact, early metallurgy started in Georgia during the 6th millennium BC, associated with the Sholavari-Shomu culture. Antiquity. Archaeological evidence indicates that Georgia has been the site of wine production since at least 6000 BC, which over time played a role in forming Georgia's culture and national identity. The classical period saw the rise of a number of early Georgian states, the principal of which were Colchis in the west and Iberia in the east. In Greek mythology, Colchis was the location of the golden fleece sought by Jason and the Argonauts in Apollonius Rhodius' epic tale Argonautica. The incorporation of the golden fleece into the myth may have derived from the local practice of using fleeces to sift gold dust from rivers. In the 4th century BC, a kingdom of Iberia, an early example of advanced state organization under one king and an aristocratic hierarchy, was established. After the Roman Republic completed its brief conquest of what is now Georgia in 66 BC, the area became a primary objective of what would eventually turn out to be over 700 years of protracted Irano-Roman geopolitical rivalry and warfare. From the 1st centuries AD, the cult of Mithras, pagan beliefs, and Zoroastrianism were commonly practiced in Georgia. In 337 AD, King Mirian III declared Christianity as the state religion, giving a great stimulus to the development of literature, arts, and ultimately playing a key role in the formation of the unified Georgian nation. The acceptance led to the slow but sure decline of Zoroastrianism, which until the 5th century AD, appeared to have become something like a second established religion in Iberia, and was widely practiced there. Middle Ages up to early modern period. Located on the crossroads of protracted Roman-Persian wars, the early Georgian kingdoms disintegrated into various feudal regions by the early Middle Ages. This made it easy for the remaining Georgian realms to fall victim to the early Muslim conquests in the 7th century. Bagrated Iberia. Kingdom of Abkhazia. United Georgian Monarchy. Tripartite division. Within the Russian Empire. On December 22, 1800, Tsar Paul I of Russia, at the alleged request of the Georgian King George XII, signed the proclamation on the incorporation of Georgia within the Russian Empire, which was finalized by a decree on January 8, 1801, and confirmed by Tsar Alexander I on September 12, 1801. The Bagrationi royal family was deported from the kingdom. The Georgian envoy in St. Petersburg reacted with a note of protest that was presented to the Russian Vice-Chancellor Prince Kurykin. In May 1801, under the oversight of General Karl Heinrich von Knorring, Imperial Russia transferred power in eastern Georgia to the government headed by General Ivan Petrovich Lazarev. The Georgian nobility did not accept the decree until April 12, 1802, when Knorring assembled the nobility at the Sinai Cathedral and forced them to take an oath on the imperial crown of Russia. Those who disagreed were temporarily arrested. In the summer of 1805, Russian troops on the Askrani River near Zagam defeated the Iranian army during the 1804–13 Russo-Persian War and saved Tbilisi from reconquest now that it was officially part of the imperial territories. Russian suzerainty over eastern Georgia was officially finalized with Iran in 1813 following the Treaty of Gulistan. Following the annexation of eastern Georgia, the Western Georgian Kingdom of Imereti was annexed by Tsar Alexander I. The last Imeretian king and the last Georgian Bagrationi ruler, Solomon II, died in exile in 1815, after attempts to rally people against Russia and to enlist foreign support against the latter, had been in vain. From 1803 to 1878, as a result of numerous Russian wars now against Ottoman Turkey, several of Georgia's previously lost territories such as Adjara were recovered, and also incorporated into the empire. The Principality of Guria was abolished and incorporated into the empire in 1829, while Svaneti was gradually annexed in 1858. Mingrelaya, although a Russian protectorate since 1803, was not absorbed until 1867. Russian rule offered the Georgians security from external threats, but it was also often heavy-handed and insensitive. By the late 19th century, discontent with the Russian authorities grew into a national revival movement led by Ilya Chavchavadze. This period also brought social and economic change to Georgia, with new social classes emerging. The emancipation of the serfs freed many peasants but did little to alleviate their poverty. The growth of capitalism created an urban working class in Georgia. Both peasants and workers found expression for their discontent through revolts and strikes, culminating in the Revolution of 1905. Their cause was championed by the socialist Mensheviks, who became the dominant political force in Georgia in the final years of Russian rule. Declaration of Independence. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Transcaucasian Democratic Federative Republic was established with Nikolai Chkij acting as its president. The federation consisted of three nations: Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. As the Ottomans advanced into the Caucasian territories of the crumbling Russian Empire, Georgia declared independence on May 26, 1918. The Menshevik Social Democratic Party of Georgia won the parliamentary election and its leader, Zhetardanya, became prime minister. Despite the Soviet takeover, Zhetardanya was recognized as the legitimate head of the Georgian government by France, UK, Belgium, and Poland through the 1930s. The 1918 Georgian-Armenian War, which erupted over parts of disputed provinces between Armenia and Georgia populated mostly by Armenians, ended because of British intervention. In 1918–1919, Georgian General Georgy Mazhniashvili led an attack against the White Army led by Moiseev and Denikin in order to claim the Black Sea coastline from Twistisachi and Adler for the independent Georgia. In 1920, Soviet Russia recognized Georgia's independence with the Treaty of Moscow. But the recognition proved to be of little value, as the Red Army led by Joseph Stalin invaded Georgia in 1921 and formally annexed it into the Soviet Union in 1922. Soviet Socialist Republic. In February 1921, during the Russian Civil War, the Red Army advanced into Georgia and brought the local Bolsheviks to power. The Georgian army was defeated and the Social Democratic government fled the country. On February 25, 1921, the Red Army entered Tbilisi and established a government of workers' and peasants' Soviets with Philip Makaradze as acting head of state. Georgia was incorporated into the Transcaucasian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic, alongside Armenia and Azerbaijan, in 1921, which in 1922 would become a founding member of the Soviet Union. Soviet rule was firmly established only after the insurrection was swiftly defeated. Georgia would remain an unindustrialized periphery of the USSR until the first five-year plan, when it became a major center for textile goods. Later, in 1936, the TSFSR was dissolved and Georgia emerged as a union republic, the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. Joseph Stalin, an ethnic Georgian-born Iosif Vissarionovich Jugashvili in Gori, was prominent among the Bolsheviks. Stalin was to rise to the highest position, leading the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death on March 5, 1953. In June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union on an immediate course towards Caucasian oil fields and munitions factories. They never reached Georgia, however, and almost 700,000 Georgians fought in the Red Army to repel the invaders and advance towards Berlin. Of them, an estimated 350,000 were killed. The Georgian uprising on Texel against the Germans was the last battle of the Second World War in Europe. After Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev became the leader of the Soviet Union and implemented a policy of de-Stalinization. This was nowhere else more publicly and violently opposed than in Georgia, where in 1956 riots broke out upon the release of Khrushchev's public denunciation of Stalin, which had to be dispersed by military force. Throughout the remainder of the Soviet period, Georgia's economy continued to grow and experience significant improvement, though it increasingly exhibited blatant corruption and alienation of the government from the people. With the beginning of perestroika in 1986, the Georgian Soviet leadership proved so incapable of handling the changes that most Georgians, including rank-and-file communists, concluded that the only way forward was a break from the existing Soviet system. After restoration of independence, on April 9, 1991, shortly before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Supreme Council of Georgia declared independence after a referendum held on March 31. Georgia was the first non-Baltic republic of the Soviet Union to officially declare independence. In August 1991, Romania became the first country to recognize Georgia. On May 26, Zviad Gamsakurdia was elected as the first president of independent Georgia. Gamsakurdia stoked Georgian nationalism and vowed to assert Tbilisi's authority over regions such as Abkhazia and South Ossetia that had been classified as autonomous within the Georgian SSR. He was soon deposed in a bloody coup d'état, from December 22, 1991 to January 6, 1992. The coup was instigated by part of the National Guards and a paramilitary organization called Mgedriani. The country then became embroiled in a bitter civil war, which lasted until nearly 1994. Simmering disputes within two regions of Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, between local separatists and the majority Georgian populations, erupted into widespread interethnic violence and wars. Supported by Russia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia achieved de facto independence from Georgia, with Georgia retaining control only in small areas of the disputed territories. Eduard Shevardnadze returned to Georgia in 1992. During the war in Abkhazia, roughly 230,000 to 250,000 Georgians were expelled from Abkhazia by Abkhaz separatists and North Caucasian volunteers. Around 23,000 Georgians fled South Ossetia as well. In 2003, Shevardnadze was deposed by the Rose Revolution, after Georgian opposition and international monitors asserted that November 2 parliamentary elections were marred by fraud. The revolution was led by Mikhail Saakashvili, Zurab Zvania, and Nino Burjanadze, former members and leaders of Shevardnadze's ruling party. Mikhail Saakashvili was elected as president of Georgia in 2004. Following the Rose Revolution, a series of reforms were launched to strengthen the country's military and economic capabilities, as well as to reorient its foreign policy westwards. The new government's efforts to reassert Georgian authority in the southwestern autonomous Republic of Adjara led to a major crisis in 2004. The country's newly pro-Western stance, along with accusations of Georgian involvement in the Second Chechen War, resulted in a severe deterioration of relations with Russia, fueled also by Russia's open assistance and support to the two secessionist areas. Despite these increasingly difficult relations, in May 2005 Georgia and Russia reached a bilateral agreement by which Russian military bases in Batumi and Akalkalaki were withdrawn. Russia withdrew all personnel and equipment from these sites by December 2007 while failing to withdraw from the Gudauta base in Abkhazia, which it was required to vacate after the adoption of the Adapted Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty during the 1999 Istanbul Summit. Russo-Georgian War and since. Tensions between Georgia and Russia began escalating in April 2008. A bomb explosion on August 1, 2008 targeted a car transporting Georgian peacekeepers. South Ossetians were responsible for instigating this incident, which marked the opening of hostilities and injured 5 Georgian servicemen. In response, several South Ossetian militiamen were killed by snipers. South Ossetian separatists began shelling Georgian villages on August 1. These artillery attacks immediately caused Georgian servicemen to return fire periodically. On August 7, 2008, Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili announced a unilateral ceasefire and called for peace talks. However, escalating assaults against Georgian villages were soon matched with gunfire from Georgian troops, who then proceeded to move in the direction of the capital of the self-proclaimed Republic of South Ossetia on the night of August 8, reaching its center in the morning of August 8. According to Russian military expert Pavel Felgenhauer, the Ossetian provocation was aimed at triggering the Georgian response, which was needed as a pretext for premeditated Russian military invasion. According to Georgian intelligence, and several Russian media reports, parts of the regular Russian army had already moved to South Ossetian territory through the Roki Tunnel before the Georgian military action. Russia accused Georgia of aggression against South Ossetia, and launched a large-scale land, air, and sea invasion of Georgia with the pretext of peace enforcement operation on August 8, 2008. Abkhaz forces opened a second front on August 9 by attacking the Qadari Gorge held by Georgia. Tskinvali was seized by the Russian military by August 10. Russian forces occupied Georgian cities beyond the disputed territories. During the conflict, there was a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Georgians in South Ossetia, including destruction of Georgian settlements after the war had ended. The war displaced 192,000 people, and while many were able to return to their homes after the war, a year later around 30,000 ethnic Georgians remained displaced. In an interview published in Kommersant, South Ossetian leader Eduard Kokoidi said he would not allow Georgians to return. President of France Nicolas Sarkozy negotiated a ceasefire agreement on August 12, 2008. Russia recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia as separate republics on August 26. In response to Russia's recognition, the Georgian government severed diplomatic relations with Russia. Russian forces left the buffer areas bordering Abkhazia and South Ossetia on October 8, and the European Union monitoring mission in Georgia was dispatched to the buffer areas. Since the war, Georgia has maintained that Abkhazia and South Ossetia are occupied Georgian territories. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Georgia has topped the list of countries which Russian exiles departed to after the war began. Russians are allowed to stay in Georgia for at least 1 year without a visa, though many Georgians view the presence of more Russian citizens in Georgia as a security risk. Government and politics. Georgia is a representative democratic parliamentary republic, with the president as the ceremonial head of state, and prime minister as the head of government. The executive branch of power is made up of the Cabinet of Georgia. The cabinet is composed of ministers, headed by the prime minister, and appointed by the parliament. Salome Zurabishvili is the current president of Georgia after winning 59.52% of the vote in the 2018 Georgian presidential election. Since February 2021, Irakli Garibashvili has been the Prime Minister of Georgia. Legislative authority is vested in the Parliament of Georgia. It is unicameral and has 150 members, known as deputies, of whom 30 are elected by plurality to represent single-member districts, and 120 are chosen to represent parties by proportional representation. Members of Parliament are elected for 4-year terms. On May 26, 2012, Saakashvili inaugurated a new parliament building in the western city of Kutaisi, in an effort to decentralize power and shift some political control closer to Abkhazia. Saakashvili's rivals, who came to power later in 2012, never truly accepted the move to Kutaisi, and 6 years later Parliament returned to its old location in Tbilisi after adapting the constitutional clause. Different opinions exist regarding the degree of political freedom in Georgia. Saakashvili believed in 2008 that the country is on the road to becoming a European democracy. Freedom House lists Georgia as a partly free country, recognizing a trajectory of democratic improvement surrounding the 2012-13 transfer of power, yet observing a gradual backslide in later years. Recent political developments. In preparation for the 2012 parliamentary elections, Georgia implemented constitutional reforms to switch to a parliamentary democracy, moving executive powers from the president to the prime minister. The transition was set to start with the October 2012 parliamentary elections and to be completed with the 2013 presidential elections. Against the expectations of the then-ruling United National Movement of President Mikhail Saakashvili, the six-party opposition coalition around newly found Georgian Dream won the parliamentary elections in October 2012, bringing an end to 9 years of UNM rule and marking the first peaceful, electoral, transfer of power in Georgia. President Saakashvili acknowledged the defeat of his party on the following day. Georgian Dream was founded, led, and financed by tycoon Bidzina Ivaniashvili, the country's richest man, who was subsequently elected by parliament as new prime minister. Due to the incomplete transition to parliamentary democracy, a year of uneasy cohabitation between rivals Ivaniashvili and Saakashvili followed until the October 2013 presidential elections. In October 2013, Georgy Margvelashvili, a candidate of the Georgian Dream Party, won the presidential election. Margvelashvili succeeded President Mikhail Saakashvili, who had served the maximum of 2 terms since coming to power after the bloodless 2003 Rose Revolution. However, the new constitution made the role of president largely ceremonial. With the completed transfer of power, Prime Minister Ivaniashvili stepped aside and named one of his close business associates as next prime minister. Ivaniashvili has since been called the informal leader of Georgia, arranging political reappointments from behind the scenes. In October 2016, the ruling party Georgian Dream won the parliamentary elections with 48.61% of the vote, while the opposition United National Movement gained 27.04% of the vote. Most of Georgian Dream's coalition parties had left the coalition and landed outside of parliament. As a result of the mixed proportional majoritarian system, with a threshold of 5% for the proportional vote and redefined majoritarian districts, only 4 parties entered parliament, with the Georgian Dream Party gaining a constitutional majority of 77%. This electoral imbalance became a key issue of political and civil society strife in the following years. After international mediation to overcome the deep political crisis in the run-up to the 2020 parliamentary elections, an amended electoral system was adopted, specifically for the 2020 elections. Meanwhile, Salome Zurabishvili won the 2018 presidential election in 2 rounds, becoming the first woman in Georgia to hold the office in full capacity after Parliament Speaker Nino Burjanadze held the office as female interim president twice, in 2003 and 2007. Zurabishvili was backed by the ruling Georgian Dream Party. It was the last direct election of a Georgian president, as additional constitutional reforms removed the popular vote. On October 31, 2020, the ruling Georgian Dream, again led by Bidzina Ivaniashvili, secured over 48% of votes in the parliamentary election under a different electoral system. 120 parliamentary seats were elected through proportional vote, while 30 seats were elected through single-mandate majoritarian constituencies. The threshold for the proportional vote was lowered to 1%, which resulted in 9 parties being represented in parliament. As largest faction, having secured 90 out of 150 seats, Georgian Dream formed the country's next government and continued to govern alone. The opposition made accusations of fraud, which the Georgian Dream denied. Thousands of people gathered outside the Central Election Commission to demand a new vote. This led to a new political crisis that was resolved with an EU-brokered agreement, from which the Georgian Dream later withdrew. In February 2021, Irakli Garibashvili became Prime Minister of Georgia, following the resignation of Prime Minister Georgi Gakaria. Garibashvili, who had an earlier term as Prime Minister in 2013-15, is known as a political hardliner. On October 1, 2021, former President Mikhail Saakashvili was arrested on his return from exile. Saakashvili led the country from 2004 to 2013 but was later convicted in absentia on corruption charges and abuse of power, which he denied. Foreign relations. Georgia maintains good relations with its direct neighbors Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, and is a member of the United Nations, the Council of Europe, the World Trade Organization, the Organization of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Community of Democratic Choice, the Guam Organization for Democracy and Economic Development, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the Asian Development Bank. Georgia also maintains political, economic, and military relations with France, Germany, Israel, Japan, South Korea, Sri Lanka, Turkey, Ukraine, the United States, and many other countries. The explicit Western orientation of Georgia, deepening political ties with the US and European Union, notably through its EU and NATO membership aspirations, the US Train and Equip Military Assistance Program, and the construction of the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, have frequently strained Tbilisi's relations with Moscow. Georgia's decision to boost its presence in the coalition forces in Iraq was an important initiative. Georgia is currently working to become a full member of NATO. In August 2004, the Individual Partnership Action Plan of Georgia was submitted officially to NATO. On October 29, 2004, the North Atlantic Council of NATO approved the Individual Partnership Action Plan of Georgia, and Georgia moved on to the second stage of Euro-Atlantic integration. In 2005, the agreement on the appointment of Partnership for Peace liaison officer between Georgia and NATO came into force, whereby a liaison officer for the South Caucasus was assigned to Georgia. On March 2, 2005, the agreement was signed on the provision of the host nation support to and transit of NATO forces and NATO personnel. On 6-9 March 2006, the IPAP Implementation Interim Assessment Team arrived in Tbilisi. On April 13, 2006, the discussion of the assessment report on implementation of the Individual Partnership Action Plan was held at NATO headquarters, within 26+1 format. The majority of Georgians and politicians in Georgia support the push for NATO membership. In 2011, the North Atlantic Council designated Georgia as an aspirant country. Since 2014, Georgia-NATO relations are guided by the substantial NATO-Georgia package, which includes the NATO-Georgia Joint Training and Evaluation Center and facilitation of multinational and regional military drills. In September 2019, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that NATO approaching our borders is a threat to Russia. He was quoted as saying that if NATO accepts Georgian membership with the article on collective defense covering only Tbilisi-administered territory, we will not start a war, but such conduct will undermine our relations with NATO and with countries who are eager to enter the alliance. George W. Bush became the first sitting U.S. president to visit the country. The street leading to Tbilisi International Airport has since been dubbed George W. Bush Avenue. On October 2, 2006, Georgia and the European Union signed a joint statement on the agreed text of the Georgia-European Union Action Plan within the European Neighbourhood Policy. The action plan was formally approved at the EU-Georgia Cooperation Council session on November 14, 2006, in Brussels. In June 2014, the EU and Georgia signed an association agreement, which entered into force on July 1, 2016. On December 13, 2016, EU and Georgia reached the agreement on visa liberalization for Georgian citizens. On February 27, 2017, the Council adopted a regulation on visa liberalization for Georgians traveling to the EU for a period of stay of 90 days in any 180-day period. Georgia applied for EU membership on March 3, 2022, soon after the beginning of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. Military. Georgia's military is organized into land and air forces. They are collectively known as the Georgian Defense Forces. The mission and functions of the GDF are based on the Constitution of Georgia, Georgia's law on defense and national military strategy, and international agreements to which Georgia is signatory. The military budget of Georgia for 2021 is $900 million. The biggest part, 72% of the military budget, is allocated for maintaining defense forces' readiness and potency development. After its independence from the Soviet Union, Georgia began to develop its own military industry. The first exhibition of products made by STC Delta was in 1999. STC Delta now produces a variety of military equipment, including armored vehicles, artillery systems, aviation systems, personal protection equipment, and small arms. During later periods of the Iraq War, Georgia had up to 2,000 soldiers serving in the multinational force. Georgia also participated in the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, with 1,560 troops in 2013. It was at that time the largest contributor among non-NATO countries and in per capita terms. Over 11,000 Georgian soldiers have been rotated through Afghanistan. As of 2015, 31 Georgian servicemen have died in Afghanistan, most during the Helmand campaign. In addition, 435 were wounded, including 35 amputees. Law enforcement. In Georgia, law enforcement is conducted and provided for by the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Georgia. In recent years, the Patrol Police Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Georgia has undergone a radical transformation, with the police having now absorbed a great many duties previously performed by dedicated independent government agencies. New duties performed by the police include border security and customs functions and contracted security provision. The latter function is performed by the dedicated security police. In 2005, President Mikhail Saakashvili fired the entire traffic police force of the Georgian National Police due to corruption. A new force was then subsequently built around new recruits. The U.S. State Department's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs has provided assistance to the training efforts and continues to act in an advisory capacity. The new patrol force was first introduced in the summer of 2005 to replace the traffic police, a force which was accused of widespread corruption. The police introduced a 0-2-2 emergency dispatch service in 2004. Corruption. Prior to the Rose Revolution, Georgia was among the most corrupt countries in the world. However, following the reforms brought by the peaceful revolution, the level of corruption in the country abated dramatically. In 2010, Transparency International named Georgia the best corruption buster in the world. In 2012, the World Bank called Georgia a unique success of the world in fighting corruption, noting Georgia's experience shows that the vicious cycle of endemic corruption can be broken and, with appropriate and decisive reforms, can be turned into a virtuous cycle. Although Georgia has been very successful in reducing blatant forms of corruption, other more subtle corrupt practices have been noted. For example, in its 2017 report, Council of Europe observed that while most day-to-day corruption has been eliminated, there are some indications of a clientelistic system whereby the country's leadership may allocate resources in ways that generate the loyalty and support it needs to stay in power. Since 2012, stagnation in corruption fighting efforts can be observed, according to Transparency International. Since 2016, the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index hovers around 56 out of 100 points. In comparison, that places Georgia in the top 50 out of 180 countries, among Central European and Mediterranean EU member states. Human rights. Human rights in Georgia are guaranteed by the country's constitution. There is an independent human rights public defender elected by the Parliament of Georgia to ensure such rights are enforced. Georgia has ratified the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities in 2005. NGO Tolerance, in its alternative report about its implementation, speaks of a rapid decrease in the number of Azerbaijani schools and cases of appointing headmasters to Azerbaijani schools who do not speak the Azerbaijani language. The government came under criticism for its alleged use of excessive force on May 26, 2011 when it dispersed protesters led by Nino Burjanadze, among others, with tear gas and rubber bullets after they refused to clear Rustaveli Avenue for an Independence Day parade. Despite the expiration of their demonstration permit and despite being offered to choose an alternative venue. While human rights activists maintained that the protests were peaceful, the government pointed out that many protesters were masked and armed with heavy sticks and Molotov cocktails. Georgian opposition leader Nino Burjanadze said the accusations of planning a coup were baseless, and that the protesters' actions were legitimate. Since independence, Georgia maintained harsh policies against drugs, handing out lengthy sentences even for marijuana use. This came under criticism from human rights activists and led to protests. In response to lawsuits from civil society organizations, in 2018, the Constitutional Court of Georgia ruled that consumption of marijuana is an action protected by the right to free personality and that can only harm the user's health, making that user him/herself responsible for the outcome. The responsibility for such actions does not cause dangerous consequences for the public. With this ruling, Georgia became one of the first countries in the world to legalize cannabis, although using the drug in the presence of children is still illegal and punishable by fines and/or imprisonment. Administrative divisions. Georgia is administratively divided into 9 regions, 1 capital region, and 2 autonomous republics. These in turn are subdivided into 67 districts and 5 self-governing cities. Georgia contains 2 official autonomous regions, of which one has declared independence. Officially autonomous within Georgia, the de facto independent region of Abkhazia declared independence in 1999. In addition, another territory not officially autonomous has also declared independence. South Ossetia is officially known by Georgia as the Tskinvali region, as it views South Ossetia as implying political bonds with Russian North Ossetia. It was called South Ossetian Autonomous Oblast when Georgia was part of Soviet Union. Its autonomous status was revoked in 1990. De facto separate since Georgian independence, offers were made to give South Ossetia autonomy again, but in 2006 an unrecognized referendum in the area resulted in a vote for independence. In both Abkhazia and South Ossetia large numbers of people had been given Russian passports, some through a process of forced passportization by Russian authorities. This was used as a justification for Russian invasion of Georgia during the 2008 South Ossetia War, after which Russia recognized the region's independence. Georgia considers the regions as occupied by Russia. The two self-declared republics gained limited international recognition after the 2008 Russo-Georgian War. Most countries consider the regions to be Georgian territory under Russian occupation. Geography. Georgia is a mountainous country situated almost entirely in the South Caucasus, while some slivers of the country are situated north of the Caucasus watershed in the North Caucasus. The country lies between latitudes 41 degrees and 44 degrees north, and longitudes 40 degrees and 47 degrees east, with an area of 67,900 square kilometers. The Laki Range divides the country into eastern and western halves. Historically, the western portion of Georgia was known as Caucasus while the eastern plateau was called Iberia. The Greater Caucasus mountain range forms the northern border of Georgia. The main roads through the mountain range into Russian territory lead through the Roki Tunnel between Chitakartli and North Ossetia and the Daryal Gorge. The southern portion of the country is bounded by the Lesser Caucasus Mountains. The Greater Caucasus mountain range is much higher in elevation than the Lesser Caucasus Mountains, with the highest peaks rising more than 5,000 meters above sea level. The highest mountain in Georgia is Mount Shkara at 5,068 meters, and the second highest is Mount Jenga at 5,059 m above sea level. Other prominent peaks include Mount Kazbek at 5,047 m, Shota Rustaveli 4,860 m, Taitnaldi 4,858 m, Ushba 4,700 m, and Alima 4,547 m. Out of the above-mentioned peaks, only Kazbek is of volcanic origin. The region between Kazbek and Shkara along the main Caucasus Range is dominated by numerous glaciers. The term Lesser Caucasus Mountains is often used to describe the mountainous areas of southern Georgia that are connected to the Greater Caucasus mountain range by the Laki Range. The area can be split into two separate subregions, the Lesser Caucasus Mountains, which run parallel to the Greater Caucasus Range, and the southern Georgia volcanic highland. The overall region can be characterized as being made up of various, interconnected mountain ranges and plateaus that do not exceed 3,400 meters in elevation. Prominent features of the area include the Javakiti volcanic plateau, lakes, including Tabatskuri and Paravani, as well as mineral water and hot springs. Two major rivers in Georgia are the Ryanai and the Mtkvari. Topography. The landscape within the nation's boundaries is quite varied. Western Georgia's landscape ranges from lowland marsh forests, swamps, and temperate rine forests to eternal snows and glaciers, while the eastern part of the country even contains a small segment of semi-arid plains. Much of the natural habitat in the low-lying areas of western Georgia has disappeared during the past 100 years because of the agricultural development of the land and urbanization. The large majority of the forests that covered the Caucasus Plain are now virtually non-existent with the exception of the regions that are included in the national parks and reserves. At present, the forest cover generally remains outside of the low-lying areas and is mainly located along the foothills and the mountains. Western Georgia's forests consist mainly of deciduous trees below 600 meters above sea level and contain species such as oak, hornbeam, beech, elm, ash, and chestnut. Evergreen species such as box may also be found in many areas. Ca 1,000 of all 4,000 higher plants of Georgia are endemic to this country. The west-central slopes of the Meskheti Range in Ajaria as well as several locations in Samegrelo and Abkhazia are covered by temperate rain forests between 601,000 meters above sea level. The deciduous forest becomes mixed with both broadleaf and coniferous species making up the plant life. The zone is made up mainly of beech, spruce, and fir forests. From 1,500–1,800 meters, the forest becomes largely coniferous. The tree line generally ends at around 1,800 meters and the alpine zone takes over, which in most areas, extends up to an elevation of 3,000 meters above sea level. Eastern Georgia's landscape is considerably different from that of the west, although, much like the Caucasus Plain in the west, nearly all of the low-lying areas of eastern Georgia including the Mtkvari and Alazani River plains have been deforested for agricultural purposes. The general landscape of eastern Georgia comprises numerous valleys and gorges that are separated by mountains. In contrast with western Georgia, nearly 85% of the forests of the region are deciduous. Coniferous forests only dominate in the Borhomi Gorge and in the extreme western areas. Out of the deciduous species of trees, beech, oak, and hornbeam dominate. Other deciduous species include several varieties of maple, aspen, ash, and hazelnut. At higher elevations above 1,000 meters above sea level, pine and birch forests dominate. In general, the forests in eastern Georgia occur between 502,000 meters above sea level, with the alpine zone extending from 2,002,300 to 3,003,500 meters. The only remaining large, lowland forests remain in the Alazani Valley of Kakheti. Climate. The climate of Georgia is extremely diverse, considering the nation's small size. There are two main climatic zones, roughly corresponding to the eastern and western parts of the country. The Greater Caucasus Mountain Range plays an important role in moderating Georgia's climate and protects the nation from the penetration of colder air masses from the north. The Lesser Caucasus Mountains partially protect the region from the influence of dry and hot air masses from the south. Much of western Georgia lies within the northern periphery of the humid subtropical zone with annual precipitation ranging from 1,000 to 500 mm, reaching a maximum during the autumn months. The climate of the region varies significantly with elevation, and while much of the lowland areas of western Georgia are relatively warm throughout the year, the foothills and mountainous areas experience cool, wet summers and snowy winters. Eastern Georgia has a transitional climate from humid subtropical to continental. The region's weather patterns are influenced both by dry Caspian air masses from the east and humid Black Sea air masses from the west. The penetration of humid air masses from the Black Sea is often blocked by mountain ranges that separate the eastern and western parts of the nation. The wettest periods generally occur during spring and autumn, while winter and summer months tend to be the driest. Much of eastern Georgia experiences hot summers and relatively cold winters. As in the western parts of the nation, elevation plays an important role in eastern Georgia, where climatic conditions above 1,500 meters are considerably colder than in the low-lying areas. Biodiversity. Because of its high landscape diversity and low latitude, Georgia is home to about 5,601 species of animals, including 648 species of vertebrates, and many of these species are endemics. A number of large carnivores live in the forests, namely brown bears, wolves, lynxes and Caucasian leopards. The common pheasant is an endemic bird of Georgia which has been widely introduced throughout the rest of the world as an important game bird. The species number of invertebrates is considered to be very high, but data is distributed across a high number of publications. The spider checklist of Georgia, for example, includes 501 species. The Ryani River may contain a breeding population of the critically endangered bastard sturgeon. Slightly more than 6,500 species of fungi, including lichen-forming species, have been recorded from Georgia, but this number is far from complete. The true total number of fungal species occurring in Georgia, including species not yet recorded, is likely to be far higher, given the generally accepted estimate that only about 7% of all fungi worldwide have so far been discovered. Although the amount of available information is still very small, a first effort has been made to estimate the number of fungal species endemic to Georgia, and 2,595 species have been tentatively identified as possible endemics of the country. 1,729 species of plants have been recorded from Georgia in association with fungi. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, there are 4,300 species of vascular plants in Georgia. Georgia is home to 4 ecoregions: Caucasus mixed forests, Euxine Kolchik deciduous forests, Eastern Anatolian montane steppe, and Azerbaijan shrub desert and steppe. It had a 2018 Forest Landscape Integrity Index mean score of 7.79/10, ranking it 31st globally out of 172 countries. Economy. Archaeological research demonstrates that Georgia has been involved in commerce with many lands and empires since ancient times, largely due to its location on the Black Sea and later on the historical Silk Road. Gold, silver, copper, and iron have been mined in the Caucasus Mountains. Georgian winemaking is a very old tradition and a key branch of the country's economy. The country has sizable hydropower resources. Throughout Georgia's modern history, agriculture and tourism have been principal economic sectors, because of the country's climate and topography. For much of the 20th century, Georgia's economy was within the Soviet model of command economy. Since the fall of the USSR in 1991, Georgia embarked on a major structural reform designed to transition to a free market economy. As with all other post-Soviet states, Georgia faced a severe economic collapse. The civil war and military conflicts in South Ossetia and Abkhazia aggravated the crisis. The agriculture and industry output diminished. By 1994, the gross domestic product had shrunk to a quarter of that of 1989. Since the early 21st century, visible positive developments have been observed in the economy of Georgia. In 2007, Georgia's real GDP growth rate reached 12%, making Georgia one of the fastest growing economies in Eastern Europe. Georgia has become more integrated into the global trading network. Its 2015 imports and exports account for 50% and 21% of GDP respectively. Georgia's main imports are vehicles, ores, fossil fuels and pharmaceuticals. Main exports are ores, ferroalloys, vehicles, wines, mineral waters and fertilizers. The World Bank dubbed Georgia the #1 economic reformer in the world because it has in 1 year improved from rank 112th to 18th in terms of ease of doing business, and by 2020 further improved its position to 6th in the world. As of 2021, it ranked 12th in the world for economic freedom. In 2019, Georgia ranked 61st on the Human Development Index. Between 2000 and 2019, Georgia's HDI score improved by 17.7%. Of factors contributing to HDI, education had the most positive influence as Georgia ranks in the top quintile in terms of education. Georgia is developing into an international transport corridor through Batumi and Poti ports, Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway line, an oil pipeline from Baku through Tbilisi to Ceyhan, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and a parallel gas pipeline, the South Caucasus Pipeline. Since coming to power, the Saakashvili administration accomplished a series of reforms aimed at improving tax collection. Among other things, a flat income tax was introduced in 2004. As a result, budget revenues have increased fourfold and a once large budget deficit has turned into a surplus. As of 2001, 54% of the population lived below the national poverty line, but by 2006 poverty decreased to 34% and by 2015 to 10.1%. In 2015, the average monthly income of a household was 1,022.3. 2015 calculations place Georgia's nominal GDP at $13.98 billion. Georgia's economy is becoming more devoted to services, moving away from the agricultural sector. Since 2014, unemployment has been gradually decreasing each year but remained in double digits and worsened during the COVID-19 pandemic. A perception of economic stagnation led to a 2019 survey of 1,500 residents finding unemployment was considered a significant problem by 73% of respondents, with 49% reporting their income had decreased over the prior year. Georgia's telecommunications infrastructure is ranked the last among its bordering neighbors in the World Economic Forum's Network Readiness Index, an indicator for determining the development level of a country's information and communication technologies. Georgia ranked number 58 overall in the 2016 NRI ranking, up from 60 in 2015. Georgia was ranked 63rd in the Global Innovation Index in 2021, down from 48th in 2019. Tourism. Tourism is an increasingly significant part of the Georgian economy. In 2016, 2,714,773 tourists brought approximately $2.16 billion to the country. In 2019, the number of international arrivals reached a record high of 9.3 million people, with foreign exchange income in the year's first 3 quarters amounting to over $3 billion. The country plans to host 11 million visitors by 2025, with annual revenues reaching $6.6 billion. According to the government, there are 103 resorts in different climatic zones in Georgia. Tourist attractions include more than 2,000 mineral springs, over 12,000 historical and cultural monuments, 4 of which are recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Other tourist attractions are Cave City, Ananuri Castle/Church, Sinagi, and Mount Kazbek. In 2018, more than 1.4 million tourists from Russia visited Georgia. Transport. Today, transport in Georgia is provided by rail, road, ferry, and air. Total length of roads in Georgia, excluding the occupied territories, is 21,110 kilometers and railways 1,576 kilometers. Positioned in the Caucasus and on the coast of the Black Sea, Georgia is a key country through which energy imports to the European Union from neighboring Azerbaijan pass. In recent years, Georgia has invested large amounts of money in the modernization of its transport networks. The construction of new highways has been prioritized and, as such, major cities like Tbilisi have seen the quality of their roads improve dramatically. Despite this, however, the quality of intercity routes remains poor, and to date only one motorway standard road has been constructed, the main east-west highway through the country. The Georgian railways represent an important transport artery for the Caucasus, as they make up the largest proportion of a route linking the Black and Caspian Seas. In turn, this has allowed them to benefit in recent years from increased energy exports from neighboring Azerbaijan to the European Union, Ukraine, and Turkey. Passenger services are operated by the state-owned Georgian Railway, whilst freight operations are carried out by a number of licensed operators. Since 2004, the Georgian railways have been undergoing a rolling program of fleet renewal and managerial restructuring, which is aimed at making the service provided more efficient and comfortable for passengers. Infrastructural development has also been high on the agenda for the railways, with the key Tbilisi railway junction expected to undergo major reorganization in the near future. Additional projects also include the construction of the economically important Kars-Tbilisi-Baku Railway, which was opened on October 30, 2017 and connects much of the Caucasus with Turkey by standard gauge railway. Air and maritime transport is developing in Georgia, with the former mainly used by passengers and the latter for transport of freight. Georgia currently has 4 international airports, the largest of which is by far Tbilisi International Airport, hub for Georgian Airways, which offers connections to many large European cities. Other airports in the country are largely underdeveloped or lack scheduled traffic, although, as of late, efforts have been made to solve both these problems. There are a number of seaports along Georgia's Black Sea coast, the largest and most busy of which is the port of Batumi. Whilst the town is itself a seaside resort, the port is a major cargo terminal in the Caucasus and is often used by neighboring Azerbaijan as a transit point for making energy deliveries to Europe. Scheduled and chartered passenger ferry services link Georgia with Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, and Ukraine. Demographics. Like most native Caucasian peoples, the Georgians do not fit into any of the main ethnic categories of Europe or Asia. The Georgian language, the most pervasive of the Kartvelian languages, is not Indo-European, Turkic, or Semitic. The present-day Georgian or Kartvelian nation is thought to have resulted from the fusion of aboriginal, autochthonous inhabitants with immigrants who moved into South Caucasus from the direction of Anatolia in remote antiquity. The population of Georgia totaled 3,688,647 as of 2022, a decrease from a figure of 3,713,804 of the previous census in October 2014. The population declined by 40,000 in 2021. A reversal of the trend towards stabilization of the last decade and, for the first time since independence, the population was recorded to be below 3.7 million. According to the 2014 census, ethnic Georgians form about 86.8% of the population, while the remainder includes ethnic groups such as Abkhazians, Armenians, Assyrians, Azerbaijanis, Greeks, Jews, Kists, Ossetians, Russians, Ukrainians, Yazidis, and others. The Georgian Jews are one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world. According to the 1926 census, there were 27,728 Jews in Georgia. Georgia was also once home to significant ethnic German communities, numbering 11,394 according to the 1926 census. Most of them were deported during World War II. The 2014 census, carried out in collaboration with the United Nations Population Fund, found a population gap of approximately 700,000 compared to the 2014 data from the National Statistical Office of Georgia, Geostat, which was cumulatively built on the 2002 census. Consecutive research estimated the 2002 census to be inflated by 8 to 9%, which affected the annually updated population estimates in subsequent years. One explanation put forward by UNFPA is that families of emigrants continued to list them in 2002 as residents for fear of losing certain rights or benefits. Also, the population registration system from birth to death was non-functional. It was not until around 2010 that parts of the system became reliable again. With the support of the UNFPA, the demographic data for the period 1994 to 2014 has been retroprojected. On the basis of that back projection, Geostat has corrected its data for these years. The 1989 census recorded 341,000 ethnic Russians, or 6.3% of the population, 52,000 Ukrainians, and 100,000 Greeks in Georgia. The population of Georgia, including the breakaway regions, has declined by more than 1 million due to net emigration in the period 1990–2010. Other factors in the population decline include birth-death deficits for the period 1995 to 2010 and the exclusion of Abkhazia and South Ossetia from the statistics. Russia received by far the most migrants from Georgia. According to United Nations data, this totaled 625,000 by 2000, declining to 450,000 by 2019. Initially the out-migration was driven by non-Georgian ethnicities, but increasing numbers of Georgians emigrated as well, due to the war, the crisis-ridden 1990s, and the subsequent bad economic outlook. The 2010 Russian census recorded about 158,000 ethnic Georgians living in Russia, with approximately 40,000 living in Moscow by 2014. There were 184,000 immigrants in Georgia in 2014, with most of them hailing from Russia, Greece, Ukraine, Germany, and Armenia. In the early 1990s, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, violent separatist conflicts broke out in the autonomous region of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region. Many Ossetians living in Georgia left the country, mainly to Russia's North Ossetia. On the other hand, at least 160,000 Georgians left Abkhazia after the breakout of hostilities in 1993. Of the Meskhetian Turks who were forcibly relocated in 1944, only a tiny fraction returned to Georgia as of 2008. The most widespread language group is the Kartvelian family, which includes Georgian, Svan, Mingrelian and Luz. The official languages of Georgia are Georgian, with Abkhaz having official status within the autonomous region of Abkhazia. Georgian is the primary language of 87.7% of the population, followed by 6.2% speaking Azerbaijani, 3.9% Armenian, 1.2% Russian, and 1% other languages. Azerbaijani once served as a lingua franca for communication among various nationalities inhabiting Eastern Caucasus. Religion. Today 83.4% of the population practices Eastern Orthodox Christianity, with the majority of these adhering to the National Georgian Orthodox Church. The Georgian Orthodox Church is one of the world's most ancient Christian churches, and claims apostolic foundation by Saint Andrew. In the first half of the 4th century, Christianity was adopted as the state religion of Iberia, following the missionary work of Saint Nino of Cappadocia. The church gained autocephaly during the early Middle Ages. It was abolished during the Russian domination of the country, restored in 1917 and fully recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople in 1989. The special status of the Georgian Orthodox Church is officially recognized in the Constitution of Georgia and the Concordat of 2002, although religious institutions are separate from the state. Religious minorities of Georgia include Muslims, Armenian Christians, and Roman Catholics. 0.7% of those recorded in the 2014 census declared themselves to be adherents of other religions, 1.2% refused or did not state their religion, and 0.5% declared no religion at all. Islam is represented by both Azerbaijani Shia Muslims, ethnic Georgian Sunni Muslims in Adjara, and Laz-speaking Sunni Muslims, as well as Sunni Meskhetian Turks along the border with Turkey. In Abkhazia, a minority of the Abkhaz population is also Sunni Muslim, alongside the faithful of the revived Abkhaz pagan faith. There are also smaller communities of Greek Muslims and Armenian Muslims, both of whom are descended from Ottoman-era converts to Turkish Islam from eastern Anatolia who settled in Georgia following the Lala Mustafa Pasha's Caucasian campaign that led to the Ottoman conquest of the country in 1578. Georgian Jews trace the history of their community to the 6th century BC, their numbers have dwindled in the last decades due to high levels of immigration to Israel. Despite the long history of religious harmony in Georgia, there have been instances of religious discrimination and violence against non-traditional faiths, such as Jehovah's Witnesses, by followers of the defrocked Orthodox priest Basil Galavishvili. In addition to traditional religious organizations, Georgia retains secular and irreligious segments of society, as well as a significant portion of religiously affiliated individuals who do not actively practice their faith. Education. The education system of Georgia has undergone sweeping, though controversial, modernization since 2004. Education in Georgia is mandatory for all children aged 6–14. The school system is divided into elementary, basic, and secondary, or alternatively vocational studies. Access to higher education is given to students who have gained a secondary school certificate. Only those students who have passed the Unified National Examinations may enroll in a state-accredited higher education institution, based on ranking of the scores received at the exams. Most of these institutions offer 3 levels of study: a bachelor's program, a master's program, and a doctoral program. There is also a certified specialists program that represents a single-level higher education program lasting from 3 to 6 years. As of 2016, 75 higher education institutions are accredited by the Ministry of Education and Science of Georgia. Gross primary enrollment ratio was 117% for the period of 2012–2014, the second highest in Europe after Sweden. Tbilisi has become the main artery of the Georgian educational system, particularly since the creation of the First Georgian Republic in 1918 permitted the establishment of modern, Georgian language educational institutions. Tbilisi is home to several major institutions of higher education in Georgia, notably the Tbilisi State Medical University, which was founded as Tbilisi Medical Institute in 1918, and the Tbilisi State University, which was established in 1918 and remains the oldest university in the entire Caucasus region. The number of faculty and staff at TSU is approximately 5,000, with over 35,000 students enrolled. The following 4 universities are also located in Tbilisi: Georgian Technical University, which is Georgia's main and largest technical university, the University of Georgia, as well as Caucasus University and Free University of Tbilisi. Culture. Georgian culture evolved over thousands of years from its foundations in the Iberian and Colchian civilizations. Georgian culture enjoyed a renaissance and golden age of classical literature, arts, philosophy, architecture, and science in the 11th century. Georgian culture was influenced by classical Greece, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the various Iranian empires, and later, from the 19th century, by the Russian Empire. This history, which has shaped its cultural, religious, and political evolution, translated into Georgians considering themselves a European nation. The Georgian language, and the classical Georgian literature of the poet Shota Rustaveli, were revived in the 19th century after a long period of turmoil, laying the foundations of the romantics and novelists of the modern era such as Grigol Orbliani, Nicolas Baratashvili, Ilya Chavchavadze, Akakit Tsereteli, and Vazop Shavla. The Georgian language is written in 3 unique scripts which, according to traditional accounts, were invented by King Pharnavazai of Iberia in the 3rd century BC. Georgia is known for its folklore, traditional music, dances, theatre, cinema, and art. Notable painters from the 20th century include Niko Pirosmani, Lado Gudiashvili, Elin Okvlediani. Notable ballet choreographers include George Balanchine, Vakhtang Chabukiani, and Nino Ananiashvili. Notable poets include Galakshan Tabaj, Lado Asishani, and Mukran Makavariani, and notable theatre and film directors include Robert Starua, Tengiz Abuladze, Georgi Danelia, and Otar Iosliani. Architecture and arts. Georgian architecture has been influenced by many civilizations. There are several architectural styles for castles, towers, fortifications and churches. The Upper Sventi fortifications, and the castle town of Shatili in Kevshirati, are some of the finest examples of medieval Georgian castle architecture. Other architectural features of Georgia include Rustaveli Avenue in Tbilisi and the Old Town District. Georgian ecclesiastic art is one of the most notable aspects of Georgian Christian architecture, which combines the classical dome style with the original basilica style, forming what is known as the Georgian cross-dome style. Cross-dome architecture developed in Georgia during the 9th century. Before that, most Georgian churches were basilicas. Other examples of Georgian ecclesiastic architecture can be found outside Georgia: Bachkovo Monastery in Bulgaria, Iveron Monastery in Greece, and the Monastery of the Cross in Jerusalem. One of the most famous late 19th/early 20th century Georgian artists was primitivist painter Niko Pirosmani. Media. Television, magazines, and newspapers in Georgia are all operated by both state-owned and for-profit corporations which depend on advertising, subscription, and other sales-related revenues. The Constitution of Georgia guarantees freedom of speech. The media environment of Georgia remains the freest and most diverse in the South Caucasus, despite the long-term politicization and polarization affecting the sector. The political struggle for control over the public broadcaster have left it without a direction in 2014 too. Music. Georgia has an ancient musical tradition, which is primarily known for its early development of polyphony. Georgian polyphony is based on 3 vocal parts, a unique tuning system based on perfect fifths, and a harmonic structure rich in parallel fifths and dissonances. 3 types of polyphony have developed in Georgia: a complex version in Sventi, a dialogue over a bass background in the Kakheti region, and a 3-part partially improvised version in western Georgia. The Georgian folk song Chakrulo was one of 27 musical compositions included on the Voyager Golden records that were sent into space on Voyager 2 on August 20, 1977. Cuisine. Georgian cuisine and wine have evolved through the centuries, adapting traditions in each era. One of the most unusual traditions of dining is supra, or Georgian table, which is also a way of socializing with friends and family. The head of supra is known as Tamada. He also conducts the highly philosophical toasts, and makes sure that everyone is enjoying themselves. Various historical regions of Georgia are known for their particular dishes, for example, Khinkali, from eastern mountainous Georgia, and Kakapuri, mainly from Imereti, Samegrelo, and Adjara. Wine. Georgia is one of the oldest wine-producing countries in the world. Archaeology indicates that fertile valleys and slopes in and around Georgia have been home to grapevine cultivation and Neolithic wine production for millennia. Local traditions associated with wine are entwined with its national identity. In 2013, UNESCO added the ancient traditional Georgian winemaking method using the Kvevri clay jars to the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage lists. Georgia's moderate climate and moist air, influenced by the Black Sea, provide the best conditions for vine cultivation. The soil in vineyards is so intensively cultivated that the grapevines grow up the trunks of fruit trees, eventually hanging down along the fruit when they ripen. This method of cultivation is called malari. Among the best-known Georgian wine regions are Kakheti, Kartli, Imereti, Rachalekhumi and Kvemo-Sventi, Adjara, and Abkhazia. Georgian wine has been a contentious issue in recent relationships with Russia. Political tensions with Russia have contributed to the 2006 Russian embargo of Georgian wine. Russia claimed Georgia produced counterfeit wine. It was an official reason, but instability of economic relations with Russia is well known, as they use the economic ties for political purposes. Counterfeiting problems stem from mislabeling by foreign producers and falsified Georgian wine labels on wines produced outside of Georgia and imported into Russia under the auspices of being Georgian produced. The shipment of counterfeit wine has been primarily channeled through Russian-managed customs checkpoints in Russian-occupied Georgian territories Abkhazia and South Ossetia, where no inspection and regulation occurs. Sports. The most popular sports in Georgia are football, basketball, rugby union, wrestling, judo, and weightlifting. Rugby is considered Georgia's national sport. Historically, Georgia has been famous for its physical education. The Romans were fascinated with Georgians' physical qualities after seeing the training techniques of ancient Iberia. Wrestling remains a historically important sport of Georgia, and some historians think that the Greco-Roman style of wrestling incorporates many Georgian elements. Within Georgia, one of the most popularized styles of wrestling is the Caucasian style. There were a number of other styles in the past that are not as widely used today. For example, the Kevshirati region of Georgia has 3 styles of wrestling. Other popular sports in 19th century Georgia were polo, and lelo, a traditional Georgian game very similar to rugby. The first and only race circuit in the Caucasian region is located in Georgia. Rustavi International Motor Park, originally built in 1978, was reopened in 2012 after total reconstruction costing $20 million. The track satisfies the FIA Grade 2 requirements and currently hosts the Legends Car Racing Series and Formula Alpha competitions. Basketball was always one of the notable sports in Georgia, and Georgia had a few very famous Soviet Union national team members, such as Otar Korkia, Mikhail Korkia, Zurab Sakandalij, and Lev Anmashvili. Dinamo Tbilisi won the prestigious EuroLeague competition in 1962. Georgia had 5 players in the NBA: Vladimir Stepaniat, Jakes Sokolidis, Nicolas Tskydishvili, Tornik Shengelia, and current Golden State Warriors center Zaza Pachulia. Other notable basketball players are 2-time EuroLeague champion Giorgi Shermatini and EuroLeague players Manuchar Markoishvili and Viktor Sanikic. Sport is regaining its popularity in the country in recent years. Georgia national basketball team qualified to Eurobasket during the last 3 tournaments since 2011. See also: Index of Georgia-related articles, Outline of Georgia, Notes, References, Sources.